Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Parenting Pickup Podcast. We're excited to have Dianne Haulcy, who is the host of Early Risers Podcast. She's the president and CEO of the Family Partnership, and she's here to educate us on what families can do to raise children who grow up to be inclusive and anti-racist. Welcome, Dianne.
Thank you for having me.
I'm personally a fan of your podcast and love all the ideas you share. And at New Horizon Academy, we are committed to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And we are doing this not only as a company, in our classrooms, and we're really excited to meet with you to talk about what families can do to help young children be more inclusive and anti-racist. And so I'll just kind of kick off our conversation with asking you to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, as stated, I am the CEO of a nonprofit called the Family Partnership, and we do a lot of human service work there, but we also do early childhood. We have 2 therapeutic early childhood programs. And I've been working in the field of early childhood human services for about 30 years. And I'm born and raised in Minnesota.
Can you give us a little overview of your podcast?
Absolutely. So my podcast is called Early Risers, and it's done in conjunction with Little Moments Count and Minnesota Public Radio. We are just finishing up our 5th season, and it's all about how to talk to young people, young children, about race and racism.
Research experts say that children are not born with certain beliefs, and that typically they're learned from generation to generation and their environments. And
Yes.
Can you kind of explain that in a little more depth for us?
Sure. You're correct. What research shows us is that children actually obviously are not born with biases. However, they, as you know, as an early childhood expert, you know that children, are learning exponentially fast in those first 3 to 5 years. And so they're picking up everything in their environment. And one of the things they are picking up are the biases in our environment. And so by the time a child is maybe 6 to 9 months old, they're already able to recognize a caregiver that is of a different race than their caregivers. And by the time a child is maybe around 3 to 4, they're already kind of assigning some biases to those racial differences and other differences, as well. And so oftentimes people think that young children are too young to talk to about race, and so they don't have sometimes they don't have conversations at all, but sometimes they want to wait until maybe the child enters school. Well, actually, by the time a child is about 5 or 6 years old, which is about the time a child is entering school, their biases are already set in.
Wow.
Yeah. And so that's why it's so important when a child is young to be able to have developmentally appropriate conversations about race and racism so that children can begin to recognize and notice things. Some people think, well, we're not racist. We don't talk about things like that in our home, so my child will be okay. Well, the fact of the matter is, especially in today's environment, children are picking up things everywhere, not just in their home and not just from their parents. They're also picking up things from their older siblings if they have them. Even though we try to keep screens from them, they're seeing them, especially post-COVID. A lot more children have been exposed to screens than maybe were before at a lot younger age. So they are picking up things from our society in general and the environment.
Those are really interesting information to share. I had not thought about how it's not only what happens in your home, it's everything around them that impacts them as well. Things they hear on the radio,
Yes.
songs they listen to,
Yes.
something they might see on television that a parent is watching the news and something could come up that you think your child's not paying attention to. But with my own children, I find they're always paying attention.
And they're always paying attention to that thing that you wish they weren't paying attention to.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so that's why it's good to have the conversation, because what the conversation does or should do is give them language. It begins to give them language and also an ability to kind of sift through what they're seeing and experiencing and be able to combat it. Because if they have no way to process it, then they have no way to combat, perhaps some racist images. And sometimes what they're picking up is, well, a lot of times what they're picking up is not a overtly racist thing that's said, but it's often implicit biases that children are picking up. And so that's even more difficult to sift through because you don't realize that they're happening.
Absolutely. Could you tell us a little bit more about implicit bias?
Absolutely. So those implicit biases are those biases that, and everybody has them. And so they are those biases that you pick up from when you're very young, and you don't realize you have them. And they are biases, all kinds of biases. So it could be anything from race to gender to language to ability to the size of a person, whatever it is. There's all kinds of biases people have. And one of the examples I like to use is, so say you're a parent and you've got your 2-year-old child in your arms and you're going into the grocery store. And you are walking in, and as you're walking in, maybe there's an African-American man that's walking out. And you may even greet this person and say, hello, and they say hi back. But as you're doing that, your body tenses up, and your child is in your arms, so she feels that tense. Now, you don't realize that that's what happened. You're being, kind to this man, but your body is reacting to years and years of implicit biases that you don't realize you have. And so your child, your 2-year-old child, because we know children are picking up everything in their environment, including what we don't say, and they're also picking up what they feel. So in that moment, that child is picking up, okay, there's danger here. And the child, you don't realize it, and the child may grow up not really realizing that's what's happening. But when they come in contact then with an African-American male, their body will begin to tense up as they grow up. So that's why it's important. One of the things, and it's difficult because people say, well, how do I know? If I don't know it, how do I know? So one of the things I like to say to people, a couple of things. One of them is it's important to know our bodies. So especially when we talk about this. And so, next time something like that happens, pay attention. Is your body tensing up? Are you getting a weird expression on your face? And the opposite is actually true too. If your body is completely relaxed, if you're, for instance, a white person and you're very comfortable being around people of color and your body is completely at rest and relaxed, your child will pick that up too as well. And so they will recognize that this is a perfectly comfortable environment for me to be in. And so it's good for us to pay attention to our bodies when we're walking in, because our bodies will tell us when we're in danger. And sometimes that's real, so we need to pay attention. Sometimes we really are in danger. If you're coming up against a bear, yeah, your body's going to tense up.
Absolutely.
You are in danger. So, but sometimes we're not really in danger, and we're picking up those implicit biases telling us we're in danger when we're not. And so it's important to kind of know your body.
That's a light bulb moment for me because I didn't think about just your body language. I thought about, in terms of inclusion and anti-racism, about the things you say, the things
Yes.
you hear, but I did not think about your body language and how you respond also sends messages.
Absolutely. And that's why when we're talking about young children, because they're picking up so much in their environment, that's why it's so important. As we grow older, we stop paying attention to so much. But as a young child, when you're learning, you're literally using all 5 of your senses all the time. As they say about 80% of brain development is happening before you're 5. And so all of your senses are involved in learning everything, which includes your biases.
Right. That's just, I think, a really great reflection point for families. And so what advice do you have for families on what can they do at home to try to really be more inclusive and create an environment that's kind of anti-racist, and what can they do? What would you recommend?
Yes. So the first thing I recommend is to never shut down a conversation about race. young children will, young children say all kind of things.
Yes, they do. And in the most opportune moments.
Yes, they do. And sometimes because of our own uncomfortableness as adults talking about race, we want to shut that conversation down. Or we're embarrassed because maybe it's in front of, a group of people that we really respect and our child said something, and so we get embarrassed, so we want to shut the conversation down. But it's important not to do that, because when you do that, children learn it's not okay to talk about this. And so, you can find appropriate things to say. If it really is an inopportune time, you could say, you know what? Now's not the time to talk about that. Can we talk about that when we get home? And then don't forget. Circle back later and say, hey, remember when you said this? I just want to, let you know. And also, it's sometimes they're very innocent things that we also shut down. Like sometimes children will notice another child is a different color and say, hey, why is that person's skin brown? Well, because of our uncomfortableness, we want to shut that conversation down, when in reality, it's a harmless conversation, because your child is learning colors, so you want them to be able to recognize when they see different colors. And so that could be an opportunity, for instance, to educate about pigmentation and why different children have, or different people have, different pigment in their skin. So it could just be a learning opportunity. And so the first thing is to not let our own uncomfortableness shut down conversation, because as children grow, that conversation might change, but you have opened up a lifelong conversation. So when the child is 5, when they're 10, when they're 15, and they're still encountering issues around race, you can continue to have that conversation at whatever age they are, because they know, this is something that we talk about, and it's okay to talk about, and it's okay to ask questions. One of the things that people feel uncomfortable about, too, is they feel like, I don't have the answer to this question, so I might as well just not say anything. And that is also telling a child it's not okay to ask questions. And it's also okay if you don't know the answer. Nobody knows everything. So, it might be one of those things where you just say, I don't know, but maybe we can find out together. Or I don't know, and maybe there's somebody that you know that maybe you can ask, and you mention that person, and let's go ask them. So whatever it is, just don't shut down the conversation. Just because you don't have the answer doesn't mean you have to make up an answer. Just let the child know it's okay that we're talking about this. I don't know the answer, but let's try to figure it out.
I think that's excellent advice. I think that is a stumbling block for parents, because oftentimes I think you're embarrassed, you shut down the conversation, and then if it goes in a direction you're like, I don't know the answer, I don't know the right thing to say,
Right.
Then you just tend to avoid. And I think it's really nice to hear you say parents have permission to sometimes say, I don't know, let me find out.
Yeah.
I think that's super powerful and incredibly helpful for families to know you don't have to have all the answers, and recognizing, too, that it's uncomfortable sometimes.
Yeah, it is. And, and it's okay to talk about all those things. The other thing that I've noticed, when you talk about, wanting to raise anti-racist children, or having an anti-racist classroom, children also, because they're learning so much at that age, they're learning by example. So if you're a parent, for instance, that has friendships, for instance, with people that are of a different race, or speak a different language in their home, then your children are more likely to grow up doing the same thing. So they're more likely to be comfortable having friendships that are outside their race, or being comfortable in those kinds of environments when their parents, and studies have shown this, when their parents have those kinds of relationships as well. And so that's another thing, that can be done, is to really begin to develop and cultivate relationships that are outside of your race, so that your children are seeing and watching how that happens.
And that's great advice, too. I think, and somewhat it's natural for children to just be around their family's friends
Right.
and learning. And it's through, if you have dinner together, you'll learn
Yeah.
about different types of
You
foods,
do.
or in their home seeing different books that they may read, or different ways you decorate your home. So it's just that nice, natural exposure to learning about others.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that's great. Well, what other resources would you recommend that families, I know you have a lot of resources, so does Little Moments Count. So what
Yes,
would you recommend in terms of resources for families?
I love that question because these days there are so many different resources out there. There's a lot of books. I love books because, of course, you know, reading is one of the most important things that you could do with your young child because it teaches reading, as you know. And I like books that are actually written by, for instance, authors of color that also give what's called a window into another culture's experience. And so that's also another way. Reading in general, I love reading in general just because you can go into a whole different world when you read a book. And this is also true with children's books. Children can learn about other cultures as they're reading books from, authors that are, of different races and of different cultures. So, there's more to be done with that, but there's a lot more, so many more books out there like this than, say, when I was growing up. So there's a lot of resources. You could just go on Amazon and Google that, and tons of books will pop up. And I also like recommending that classrooms have these kinds of books too, like early childhood classrooms would have these kinds of books. So that's one thing. Another thing that we didn't have when I was growing up that I love these days is you can actually purchase different flesh tone crayons and markers these days. And so I hear, for instance, a lot of early childhood teachers are doing that now, which is great. But, as a parent, you could do that too. And so to be able to, your child to be able to experience coloring people of all different shades, not just their own. So I love that because that also leans into the creativity of a young child, because that's part of what you want to do. You want to, foster creativity. And so this is one way that we can do it. And there's messages in that too. So for instance, when I was growing up, there was only one flesh tone. And I had an incident when I think I was in 5th grade when I was trying to, we were all making these puppets. And we went through this whole process of making, and I was real proud of my puppet. And so the last stage of making this puppet was to put the flesh on this puppet. And so I went to get what they say. Okay, they kept saying, okay, time to put the flesh tone on the flesh on. And I said, I don't see the flesh. And they said, well, it's right there. And I said, well, that's not the color of my flesh. Where's the flesh? Where's the flesh tone? You kept telling me it's time to get the flesh tone, and I don't see it. And then I remember the teacher saying, oh, you want to do that? And I said, yes, that's the color of my flesh. Needless to say, it didn't end well. And so, but nowadays, being able to have that frame of reference for teachers and parents to say there's all different kinds of flesh tone out there. There's yours, and we can color your flesh tone, whatever yours is. But there's others too, and let's experience what those other flesh tones are. So I love that. I love the flesh tone crayons and markers. So that's wonderful. And I think lastly, there are some really, and I learned this actually from Louise Derman Sparks. There's these dolls that they're actually kind of big. So they're a big size, big enough that you can put on your lap, for instance. And but they come in all different colors, and you can make up backstories about them. And what's nice about a doll is that it can help you tell a story. And so you can make up a story, a backstory about the doll and her name and where she comes from, or he, and it can help children to understand, different cultures and different things that might happen. So I like those dolls as well.
That's great. And I think these are all easy things that are accessible to families.
Yes, they
I mean,
are.
that you can find. I know that I've seen the multicultural crayons at Target.
Yes. Yeah, you can at Target now. Yep.
I've seen them at local stores, and obviously everything is really accessible online. So it's really nice that those are simple and affordable things that families
Yes.
can do to really be more inclusive and help educate their children. I think that those are great, wonderful resources. We do have a few questions from families,
Okay.
so I'll share those with you. The first comes from Lance, and Lance says, we were at the park the other day, and my 3-year-old approached me scared because another child on the playground had physical differences on their face. How do I talk to my child about acceptance and not being scared at this age?
Oh, that's a really good question, Lance. So what I would say is, first of all, not to shut down the conversation, and to, you could ask some probing questions too, like, why are you afraid? But the other thing is to do that modeling that I talked about earlier. And so modeling, going up, maybe and introducing yourself, being that parent that's introducing your child. And so when your child sees you and you're not afraid, then they become less afraid. And so that opens up a whole conversation about differences too, that you can have. And to talk about, well, this person's face might look different than you've seen before, but that doesn't mean all faces don't look the same. And it's okay. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing to be, there's nothing wrong with it. It's nothing to be afraid of. These are just, somebody that looks different. And sometimes people look different than us. And that's okay.
That's great. And I think modeling, just introducing yourself, that's a simple thing a parent can do.
Yes.
That's wonderful. We have another question from Deborah, who said, I want to talk to my daughter about racism, inclusion, and belonging, but I've heard that if you talk to children about racism, they become racist. Is that true?
I'm so glad you asked that question, Deborah, because that is one of the myths that's out there, and it's a strong one. People do believe that if you talk to young children about race, they become racist, while actually the opposite is true. When you don't talk to children about race, then they don't have the language and the wherewithal to sift through and process the implicit biases that they're experiencing. And so when you talk to young children, like I said before, it opens up that conversation. So children are never too young. It's just about being developmentally appropriate when you talk about race. There's some conversations, obviously, you wouldn't have with a young child. But at their level, children already know their colors. Or you hope they do. They hope they know their colors. So they're already recognizing different colors of people. Children know the difference between right and wrong. You try to give one child one cookie and the other one 3, and they will tell you right immediately
Absolutely.
that was not right and that was not fair. So they know those concepts. So at their level, you can talk about those concepts as it relates to race. So children are never too young, especially when you start getting questions. When a child asks a question, that's when you know it's time to have that conversation.
Those are wonderful tips. Our final question is from Becca, and she says, my son attends a school where they constantly say children don't see colors and differences, which bothers me. I want to make sure he's getting educated in diversity, inclusion, and belonging, but I don't want to enroll in a different school. What should I do?
That's a really tough question, Becca, but a good one, because I think that a lot of people find themselves in that situation. And I completely understand why you don't want to move once a child gets attached to their teachers and their friends and they know that that's a safe environment, then you're less likely to want to move. And so I completely understand that. And so some of the things that you can do is to begin to have conversations with the adults that are in the room, so the administration and the teachers, and try to do some educating about the difficulties that happen when you don't see color or when you want to create a colorblind environment. Because the reality is what you're doing in that situation is you are discounting people's experiences. And so the people of color that are in the room might feel like their unique experiences and their culture don't matter. And that's what happens when you are trying to create a colorblind, so to speak, environment. And so it's about having the conversations with the adults about what kind of environment you want your child to be in. And that's one that, well, it sounds like anyway, that's one that celebrates different cultures and celebrates the fact that we are all different colors and races, and that's great and beautiful. And perhaps you could even suggest some resources that you've done some research on and bring in. And, like you said, Little Moments Count has a whole host of resources on the website that could be helpful. And there's others, too. PBS has some great, they did a series, I think, a few years back. And so now you can, it's so easy these days. You can just go on YouTube and find some of these PBS, or even on their website, PBS website. And they have some great videos even that they've done with young children about race. And so that's another resource. So it's just getting in and doing the work with the adults, I think.
Wonderful advice. Well, I want to just say thank you so much for joining the Parenting Pickup podcast as our special guest, Dianne. You have been so knowledgeable and shared practical and helpful advice for families. So thank you so much for your time today. This has been just incredibly informational and helpful.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yes, thank you. If you'd like more information on this episode or need access to other resources mentioned, head to our website at newhorizonacademy.net. And if you have any questions, please email us at parentingpickup@nhacademy.net. Thanks, and have a great day.